Then around 2004, the cartels started taking over. And these are the Mexican cartels. And what they had was they already had the infrastructure in place because they were already trafficking on behalf of the Central American folks to get stuff in here. And then it became an issue of, well, why don't we produce this methamphetamine? And so then south of the border, meth overrid anything that the locals were doing. And so they took over that whole market. Then we had the opioid crisis where everyone's going towards popping pills because of over prescription.
Right.
And then as we pushed against that, then folks came about and tried to find heroin and other ways to satisfy that need that they had because they were already addicted. The cartels, they don't just exploit a market, they create one. And they created a market in fentanyl specifically. They learned from others. They learned from folks coming from overseas, coming from China, different areas where that was coming from in the synthetic side. But what they saw and what they seized upon was, A, it's synthetic, so you don't rely on crops anymore. So there's no seasonal issue of getting a supply to the demand. You can buy it for a whole lot cheaper than you can getting a whole bunch of poppy to make heroin, to make fentanyl. It's 50 times to 100 times more highly addictive. And so what happens when you feed that into the market, which is what happened in the teens, you start to get people who are instantly hooked on it. And so this gets to some of the myths that people have in terms of like trying to understand that. But the reality of it is you had folks who targeted specifically to create users. And the reason we saw over the last half a decade all these little M30 oxycodone pills that are mimicked pills, they're not real, was because they started stamping these pills to basically addict the folks who were already addicted to the opioids and made it easier for them to say, oh, it's kind of like the pill that I had, and so I'll smoke this. And now it's gone to the point where there's an expectation that everything has fentanyl in it, because fentanyl is the addictive thing to sell your product on the market that is us. And so that's where that comes from. And so now the latest thing we're seeing just it's going back to powder, because no one is under the illusion anymore that it's an oxycodone and guessing what it is. There's anecdotes of individuals who, of dealers in the Northwest who are getting the test strips that are supposed to be used to test fentanyl to make sure it's not fentanyl. Oh, I don't want to touch fentanyl, to make sure it's fentanyl. That's where it's going. And the reason for that is it's so highly addictive. And that's why I bring up the compassion part in terms of addicts, because it's so incredibly addictive. It's very hard for them to get off of it. It doesn't mean they didn't have a say in it. It doesn't mean they didn't have a play in it. Sure. It doesn't mean they didn't participate in their own demise. What it means is that now they're in a hole that they need help getting dug out. But you also have to have an expectation too. It's got to be both sides. And so you have to have treatment, in my mind, and you have to also have the ability to hold people accountable by the law. You have to have incarceration. You have to have those other things. Those other measures need to be in place too. And then you need to stop you need to deal with the demand in that way, and then the supply needs to be interdicted. And so that gets to the other issue of what's been a hot topic for a number of years for law enforcement, which is mandatory minimums, fentanyl deaths, those sorts of things.